You already know the scene, even if you've never had to live it. A stranger is minding their business, a service worker is trying to finish a shift, a neighborhood rule is being bent harmlessly, and then one person decides they're the appointed guardians of the situation. Their voice sharpens, their posture changes, their outrage becomes ceremonial. They demand a manager, threaten to call the police, insist on the rules, and somehow the conflict grows teeth. In the social and political sense, that's what people mean when they say a Karen, not a real person's name, but a character type, someone who weaponizes complaint, entitlement, and authority systems to control others. But here's the first uncomfortable truth: Karen isn't a diagnosis, it's a meme, and memes are blunt instruments. They can point at something real, and they can also become lazy ways to silence people, especially women who are speaking up legitimately. Legal and cultural scholars have warned that the meme can slide into sexism, ageism, and broad mockery once it gets detached from its original context. That matters because if you want the psychology behind Karens, you have to separate a behavior pattern from a label that's often used like a slap. So let's talk about the pattern, not the punchline. The core engine is usually entitlement. In social psychology, psychological entitlement refers to a pervasive belief that you deserve more than others, that rules should bend for you, and that you're owed special treatment. When someone high in entitlement feels blocked by a policy, a boundary, a minimum purchase, a no, even a harmless request, they don't experience it as an ordinary inconvenience. They experience it as an insult. And when your brain interprets inconvenience as disrespect, anger becomes strangely easy to justify. Entitlement also tends to be tied to status. Research has argued that people high in entitlement are often motivated to attain and defend status, and that status motives can shape how they react to others, especially when they feel challenged. This is one reason Karen behavior often looks theatrical. It's not only about solving a practical problem, it's about restoring a social rank that feels threatened. The complaint isn't just a request, it's a performance. I'm someone who matters here, and you will treat me like it. Now add a second ingredient: moral certainty. A lot of Karen moments are wrapped in the language of righteousness. Just trying to keep people safe. I'm protecting the neighborhood. I'm making sure the rules are followed. That kind of framing does something powerful. It turns control into virtue. It lets the person feel like a hero while they're escalating a situation that didn't need escalation. And once you feel virtuous, your brain becomes more willing to do harsh things because it doesn't register them as harsh. It registers them as necessary. This is where the meme's political meaning comes in, because many viral Karen incidents aren't only about rudeness, they're about surveillance, who gets policed, who gets presumed suspicious, and who feels entitled to summon authority against someone else. Scholars have placed Karen memes in a longer historical context of racialized monitoring and the use of institutions to maintain power differentials. In modern life, that can look like a complaint that isn't really about noise or rules, but about who belongs in a space and who doesn't. The reason people react so strongly to this pattern is that the stakes can be real. There's a whole body of scholarship and commentary on racially biased or weaponized non-emergency calls to police, sometimes discussed as white-collar crime, because calling the police is not a neutral act when the person being reported could face disproportionate danger. You've seen how quickly a small conflict can be transformed into a potentially life-altering threat when authority is introduced. And when that threat is deployed casually, it reveals something dark about the caller's mental calculus. My comfort is worth your risk. But not everyone who behaves like a Karen is consciously thinking that. A lot of it is anxiety about wearing a mask. Some people have low tolerance for ambiguity and disorder. They feel unsafe when norms are unclear, when boundaries feel porous, when other people don't behave predictably, so they try to control the environment through rule enforcement and complaints. The escalation can be less about cruelty and more about self-soothing. If they can force the world to snap back into order, their nervous system can finally relax. The tragedy is that their attempt to feel safe can make everyone else feel unsafe. Another major driver is what you might call outsourced power. Plenty of people don't feel powerful in their real lives. They feel ignored at work, disrespected at home, invisible in public, and then they step into a customer role or a neighborhood role, and suddenly they have leverage. Service settings are especially vulnerable to this because the worker is paid to stay polite even when they're being mistreated. Research on customer entitlement describes how entitled customers seek perks, special treatment, and exceptions, and how these interactions can harm service workers' well being. In other words, the environment rewards the entitled person with attention and deference, which can reinforce the behavior like a habit. And habits don't need a villain, they just need a payoff. If someone has learned that escalating gets results, discounts, apologies, compliance, fear, a manager appearing like a summoned servant, then escalation becomes their default tool. Over time, they stop seeing it as escalation. They see it as how you get things done. They become the type of person who walks into life already braced for conflict, and because they're braced, they keep finding it. The label Karen also sticks because the behavior is often strangely public. It's not a private tantrum, it's a social broadcast. The person wants witnesses because witnesses validate their role as the aggrieved party. They want an audience for their outrage, and they want the audience to pressure the target into submission. That's why so many of these incidents revolve around the same actions: demanding a manager, recording someone, threatening to call security or police. The person is trying to turn personal discomfort into institutional force. But there's a twist people miss. The Karen meme has also become a weapon itself. Scholars and journalists have pointed out that once the term spread, it started getting used to shut women up broadly, sometimes regardless of context, race, or whether the complaint was reasonable. That's why the psychology behind Karens includes the psychology of the people using the label too. Because calling someone a Karen can sometimes be a way to avoid accountability, dismiss boundaries, or mock legitimate frustration. The same culture that creates entitled customers can also create people who think any complaint is entitlement. Both sides can become allergic to nuance. So what does the most accurate psychological profile look like? It's rarely a single trait. It's usually a stack: a sense of entitlement, a sensitivity to perceived disrespect, a need for control, a status defense reflex, sometimes prejudice, sometimes not, but often a willingness to use systems of authority as a shortcut to power. And nearly always, a story the person tells themselves that keeps them feeling like the good one. That story is crucial because most people can't tolerate the thought, I'm the problem. So they rewrite it as, I'm the only one brave enough to say something. If you want to understand Karen behavior at its darkest, focus on that moment when the person chooses escalation over connection, when they choose humiliation over curiosity, when they choose threat over dialogue. That choice is where the psychology lives. It's where a small inconvenience becomes a moral drama and a human being becomes an obstacle instead of a person. And if you're listening to this and you feel a prick of recognition, if you've ever felt that heat rise in you in a store, if you've ever felt the urge to teach someone a lesson, if you've ever felt powerful when someone scrambled to fix your complaint, then the point isn't to shame you. The point is to ask what you're really trying to get in that moment: respect, certainty, control, revenge, safety. Because once you name the need, you can stop meeting it through collateral damage. Because the truth is, the world is full of people who are tired, underpaid, and doing their best. And it's also full of people who feel invisible and desperate to matter. The Karen phenomenon is what happens when those two groups collide inside systems that reward loudness, punish softness, and treat escalation as a customer service strategy. The meme makes it funny. Real life makes it costly.